At my sister's wedding, all I was given was a stale slice of bread my mother sneered. That's all you merit, my sister smirked. As pathetic as ever during the speeches, I grabbed the mic. Let's see something special. The screen flickered on their faces, turned ashen. Turn it off. My sister screamed. 200 guests froze. All right, gather round, because I have a story for you. Can you imagine sitting at your own sister's 5-star wedding, surrounded by luxury, only to be served a single, dry piece of bread? That was their message to me. You're nothing. My mother, dripping in pearls, leaned in, her smile a thin, cruel line. This is enough for you, my sister, she purred, her voice dripping poison. Then my sister, the glowing bride herself, swept past in her designer heels, casting a venomous glance at my forgotten table. Pathetic, she hissed. I was, as always, utterly alone. No place card, no chilled wine, no name on the guest list, just that pathetic, stale bread. For a split second, I had two choices: tuck my tail, retreat to the bathroom, and cry exactly as they expected. Or I could remind them precisely who they were dealing with. And believe me, I chose the latter. So I waited. Through the endless, saccharine ceremony. Through the nauseatingly fake speeches about love and unity. And then, when the microphone finally made its rounds, I stood up. Calmly. I looked out at all of them and said, let's watch something special, shall we? The lights dimmed. The giant screen flickered to life. And with one click, their entire perfect world began to shatter. This wasn't just a video. It was a confession. A brutal, gut-wrenching betrayal. A secret they thought I'd never uncover. I watched my sister's hands start to tremble. My mother gasped, a strangled sound. The groom? He froze, absolutely rigid. The entire room full of guests just stared, mouths agape. Those next 3 minutes? They changed absolutely everything. You might think this is just another messy family drama. But you'd be wrong. This is the raw, ugly truth behind a so-called perfect wedding. And it's about what happens when the quiet one finally decides she's had enough of staying quiet. So, please, stay with me. Because this isn't just about revenge. This is about justice. And it's only just getting started. My name is Iris Whitmore, and at 38, I'd spent the last decade tucked away in a modest third-floor apartment in Brooklyn. I'm a photographer, but not the glamorous kind you see at fashion shoots or those ridiculously opulent society weddings. No, I'm more of a quiet observer. My lens seeks truth in the mundane, the wrinkled hands cradling a coffee cup, the haunted eyes that have seen war, the pure joy in a child's laughter, the worn-out sneakers telling a story. It wasn't flashy, sure, but it was honest. And in a world absolutely obsessed with appearances, I'd learned that dignity and honesty were the only things worth holding on to. I rarely talked about my family. Not because of some explosive, angry estrangement, but because silence was often just more bearable than the biting judgment I knew all too well. One cold afternoon, I was in my tiny studio, editing a beautiful portrait of an elderly couple married 50 years. As the soft winter light spilled through my window, my mind drifted. Not to the warmth of the image on my screen, but to a photo that simply didn't exist, my own family portrait. I had always been the other daughter. The one who didn't have Delaney's perfectly sculpted jawline or her effortless charm with strangers. While Delaney preened for pageant photos and bathed in waves of applause at her ballet recitals, I watched from backstage. Sometimes I'd hold her flowers, but more often I was just forgotten. Completely. My mother, Evelyn, used to say, Delaney was born to shine. Iris, dear, you're more of a shadow. Necessary, yes, but best when quiet. Even as a child, I understood exactly what that meant. I remember my 10th birthday. I waited, wide-eyed, in a party hat, at the little park my mother told me to go to. I kept hoping anyone, would show up. No one did. I waited for over an hour before it clicked. Evelyn had taken Delaney to a modeling audition clear across town. My birthday picnic? Completely forgotten. I walked home alone that day, clutching untouched cupcakes on my lap on the subway, feeling utterly numb. Years later, at my high school graduation, I wore a borrowed white dress, scanning the sea of beaming faces. Parents laughed, cried, hugged their kids, handed them roses. I stood alone on the curb until my friend Julie's dad, bless him, offered me a ride home. Evelyn and Reginald? They never came. They were at Delaney's magazine photo shoot instead. "Oh, we thought your graduation was tomorrow," Evelyn explained later, with that thin, dismissive smile, as if a simple mistake could erase such a monumental absence. Now, sitting there, staring at that unfinished photo on my screen, I slowly pushed back my chair. I walked to the hallway, where last year's Christmas card from my parents still hung on the bulletin board. In it, Evelyn and Reginald beamed, while Delaney and her fiancé, Jasper, sat perfectly posed in front of a grand fireplace. Everyone coordinated, cream and navy. And me? I wasn't in it. Never had been, not in any of their carefully curated holiday greetings sent out over the years. In the Whitmore house, there were never raised voices. No slammed doors, no dramatic exits. Our exclusion was polite, intentional, and chillingly consistent. My mother, Evelyn, believed in decorum above all else. If I didn't fit her perfect narrative, she wanted the world to know I was edited out. Gently, of course, but completely. My father, Reginald, never protested. He was a man of few words, preferring his evenings with newspapers and investor calls over actual conversations with his daughters. When he did speak, his words carried the cold, distant tone of a boardroom, never a living room. Delaney, for her part, was never outright cruel, not in the way kids usually are. She didn't mock me or fight with me. She just ignored me, as if I existed in some parallel universe, close enough to be glimpsed, but too insignificant to ever actually affect her perfect world. The only photos I have of us together are from early childhood, before Delaney learned she could demand the entire spotlight without ever having to share the frame. That afternoon, I opened my closet and reached for a small, unassuming box of prints I'd never shown a soul. One by one, I pulled out snapshots from what was supposed to be my family home. The sharp edge of a kitchen table where Evelyn sat, sipping wine. The long, empty hallway outside Reginald's office. Delaney's pageant crown, glinting mockingly on a windowsill. None of them were posed portraits. They were observations. Quiet, yes. Distant, absolutely, but hauntingly intimate. It was my way of remembering what it felt like to be there, yet never truly seen. I put the box down and looked at my calendar. A stark red circle around Saturday. Delaney's wedding. I hadn't even decided if I'd go. The envelope had arrived a week earlier. Thick, expensive paper, gold lettering. Addressed not to Dear Sister or even Iris Whitmore, but to MS, Iris Whitmore. No note inside. No phone call. Just the invitation. And a silent, cutting reminder, you are still not really part of this family, but your absence would be noticed, and that would be inconvenient. I stared at it, still lying open on my desk. The rational part of me screamed to stay home, to avoid the whole agonizing theater of it all. But another part, deeper, quieter, and ignored for far too long, began to stir. Maybe it was time to show up. Not for them. For me. That invitation, the one I'd begrudgingly decided to accept, was impossibly elegant. Thick. Heavy. The kind of weight that screamed prestige even before you broke the seal. I found it in my mailbox 2 days after I'd made my reluctant decision. I didn't need to guess who it was from. The gold-embossed D&J monogram, with a swirling flourish like a ridiculously expensive perfume ad, made it painfully obvious. Delaney always had a flair for drama, even on paper. I brought it inside, set it on my small dining table, and just stared at it for a long moment. Then, with a slow breath, I slid a letter opener through the seal. The card inside was stiff, pristine, printed on ivory with foil-stamped gold lettering that shimmered faintly in the morning light. The Whitmore and Langston families cordially invite you to celebrate the wedding of Delaney Marie Whitmore and Jasper Elliott Langston. The ceremony, it said, would be at the historic Baystone Grand Hotel in Boston, followed by a reception in the Versailles Ballroom. Black tie. Champagne only. I leaned back and exhaled slowly. Not from surprise, but from something far deeper, resignation. Of course, it would be the Baystone. That place was practically a shrine for Boston's upper crust, where every marble tile and gold-trimmed chair screamed legacy. And, of course, it would be Jasper. The Langstons were old money. Generations of polished teeth and silent power. Delaney always knew how to climb. She just made sure her designer heels never actually touched the ground. Within minutes, my phone rang. It was Evelyn. "Iris," my mother's voice came through, smooth and clipped. "I assume you received the invitation?" "I did." "Well, then please try to dress appropriately this time. It's a formal wedding, not a gallery opening." I let the silence stretch, just to annoy her, before answering. "You don't have to worry, Mom. I'll blend right in with the wallpaper." Evelyn didn't laugh. She never did. It's sarcasm that didn't serve her. Delaney's wedding is an important event for our family. The Langstons are not people we want to offend. "I'm not the one marrying into their family," I replied, more quietly than I intended. "You're still representing us. Just don't embarrass anyone. And no denim this time." I almost reminded her that I'd worn denim exactly once, after a brutal 10-hour train ride to make it in time for Christmas dinner, but what was the point? Evelyn had already ended the call. Later that afternoon, while sifting through prints for a client, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Delaney. Her tone, as always, was breezy. An effortless mix of false warmth and thinly veiled command. "Hey sis, so excited you're coming. Quick favor, would you mind snapping a few pics during the reception? Nothing fancy, just candid moments. You know, you've got the best eye, and we figured since you're family, it'd be super meaningful. And free, of course." Haha. I stared at the screen, and I could practically hear Delaney's voice rising slightly on that word, free, as if it were a joke, as if it wasn't absolutely expected. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. For a fleeting moment, I considered declining outright. But I knew exactly what that would trigger. A furious call from Evelyn, a passive-aggressive tirade about my selfishness, about how I never do anything for my sister, even though she's always included you. It would be a conversation I'd already played out 100 times in my head. So I replied politely, but firmly, "I appreciate the thought, but I'd like to attend as a guest this time." Delaney never responded. That evening, the sun dipped below the Brooklyn skyline, painting the city in amber and steel. I was pouring myself some tea when my phone rang again. Unknown number. I answered cautiously. "Miss Whitmore, this is Sylvia Renner's assistant. I'm calling on behalf of Clarion Gallery." My heart literally skipped a beat. "We're pleased to inform you that your work has been selected for our spring showcase, Portraits of Solitude. Sylvia loved your submissions," she said, your eyes unflinching. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I'd submitted that series almost a year ago. Intimate, raw portraits of people lost in quiet reflection. It had felt like such a long shot, something I did more for myself than for any recognition. And now, out of nowhere, this invitation. "Thank you," I managed, my voice barely steady. "That's incredible. You'll be receiving formal confirmation by email, but Miss Renner wanted to let you know personally. She believes you have something rare." When the call ended, I stood absolutely still in the center of my apartment, my hand pressed against my chest, as if trying to keep that unbelievable moment inside me. I picked up my phone again and, despite myself, I called my mother. It rang 3 times before Evelyn finally answered. "Hello." "Hi, Mom," I said. "I just wanted to share something. I got accepted into Clarion's spring show. Sylvia Renner herself chose my work." There was a pause. A pause just long enough to leave a bruise. "That's nice, Iris. Listen, I'm in the middle of finalizing some seating plans for the wedding. Can we talk later?" The line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly, then placed it down without a sound. A golden wedding. A golden opportunity. 2 invitations, one handwritten in art and effort, the other mass-printed and sealed in silence. I knew, with absolute certainty, which one mattered more. The Baystone Grand gleamed under the pale winter sky, its towering facade adorned with white columns and gold-trimmed doors that glinted in the morning sun. I stepped out of the hired town car, my emerald green dress brushing against my calves as a cold gust swept through the hotel courtyard. The dress itself was modest, no sequins, no lace, Just clean lines and quiet elegance. Just like me. I adjusted my purse strap, taking a steadying breath before walking through those ornate revolving doors. Inside, guests were already milling about the cathedral-style lobby, absolutely dripping in layers of wealth. Men in sharp tuxedos, women in designer heels that clicked against the marble floors. Conversations floated through the air, crisp with polite laughter and hollow compliments. I stood quietly, my eyes scanning the sprawling floral arrangements that trailed up the grand staircase. White lilies, of course. Delaney always adored symbolism, especially when it made her look impossibly innocent. A young woman in a black headset approached me, clipboard in hand, a practiced, almost robotic smile on her face. "Miss Whitmore, welcome. If you'll follow me, I'll show you to your table." I nodded, my heels soft against the carpeted hall as we passed the glittering ballroom entrance. I fully expected my seat to be near the back. I wasn't naive. But when the attendant led me down a narrow corridor, past the main reception doors, and towards a far corner right next to the emergency exit, my stomach clenched. "Here you are," the woman said, gesturing to a small, round table set for one. A single name card sat in front of an empty plate, Iris Whitmore. The table was tucked beside a coat rack and a glowing red exit sign. It was far enough from the main room to feel completely forgotten, but close enough that I could still hear the string quartet playing a gentle tune inside. The other tables? Adorned with flickering candles, gold-trimmed menus, sparkling crystal glasses. My table had none of it. Nothing. I sat down slowly, adjusting the hem of my dress over my lap. That's when I saw it. A small porcelain plate, placed right in the center of my setting. On it, a single, solitary piece of dry bread. No butter. No garnish. No explanation. I blinked. Surely this was a mistake. I looked around, desperately searching for a server, anyone. Instead, I saw Evelyn. My mother. She glided towards me like a swan through still water, dressed in shimmering silver satin and pearls, her hair in a flawless chignon. She wore that smile, the one that never quite reached her eyes. "Darling," Evelyn cooed, her voice thick with syrup. "So glad you could make it. You look comfortable." I met her gaze, but said nothing. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice, just enough to be inaudible to anyone passing by. "I see you found your place. With your career and freelance photography, I imagine this meal is rather appropriate." "Simple, humble," she said, her hand gesturing towards the bread as if she were presenting a priceless delicacy. "This is what you're used to, isn't it, Iris?" My jaw tightened, a muscle clenching, but I kept my face utterly still. My mother stood there for a moment longer, savoring the silence, then turned and walked away without waiting for a reply. Pure ice. A few minutes later, the music swelled, then shifted. Delaney appeared near the ballroom entrance, a vision in her custom wedding gown, a cascade of satin and hand-stitched lace. She was stunning, radiant, the absolute picture of composed grace. The crowd inside erupted in polite applause, a sea of admiring faces. As the bride began her triumphant rounds, she eventually floated toward my pathetic little corner of the corridor. When she reached my table, she tilted her head, her smile saccharine, like someone offering condolences at a funeral. "Hello, big sister," Delaney purred, her lips curling into a delicate, venomous smile. "You made it." "I did," I replied, my voice flat. Delaney glanced at the dry bread, then at the empty chair beside me, then back at my face. "Your dress," she said, a long pause, charming. "Very minimalist." Another beat. "You know," she added, lowering her voice, "I always admired how you managed to make everything look so affordable. It's a gift. You make even the most ordinary things look cheaper." I just stared at her, my blood running cold. "You've never really understood presentation, have you?" Still, I said nothing. Instead, I reached into my small handbag and, with agonizing slowness, pulled out a small, black USB stick. I didn't raise it in defiance. I didn't wave it like a threat. I simply placed it in my lap, my thumb resting lightly on its smooth, innocent surface. Delaney's smile faltered. For the briefest, most satisfying second. Well, she said, her voice tightening with a hint of unease, enjoy the evening. I simply nodded. Delaney turned and walked back into the ballroom, her magnificent train catching briefly on the leg of a gilded chair before snapping free. Left alone at my table, beside that fire exit, I looked once more at the dry piece of bread on the plate before me. I didn't touch it. Instead, I turned my gaze toward the glittering ballroom lights and waited. Not for food. Not for conversation. But for the moment when my silence would mean more than anything my family had ever spoken aloud. The silence before the storm. The coldness of that bread. Its dryness. The biting silence that came with it. It hadn't left my mind. As I sat there alone near the fire exit, my fingers curled lightly around the small black USB in my lap. I felt the profound weight of a decision that had been days, even weeks, in the making, whether or not I would ever actually use what I'd captured. And now, in this tense quiet, just before the speeches were set to begin, my mind drifted back to the night it all started to take shape. It was 3 weeks earlier. The Langston family's private engagement party for Delaney and Jasper, hosted in the rooftop lounge of an elite hotel overlooking Boston Harbor. The event felt less like a celebration of love and more like an ostentatious display of legacy. Delaney had insisted I bring my camera. Not as a professional, of course, she'd said, with a breezy, dismissive laugh, just for a few candid shots to make Mom happy. I showed up with my smaller rig, more out of habit than obligation. I didn't want to make a scene. I'd long ago learned to choose my battles. Most of the night, I stayed in the shadows, capturing blurred moments, champagne flutes, children chasing each other under glittering chandeliers, Jasper making polite, stiff rounds through guests who whispered his name like royalty. I knew how to be invisible and, honestly, I preferred it. My lens gave me cover. My silence gave me power. Toward the end of the evening, after most of the guests had drifted to the open terrace to watch the fireworks, I wandered back into the empty lounge to adjust my camera settings. That's when I saw her. Delaney, alone near the bar, her phone lit up in her hand, her expression tight with something I couldn't quite place. She didn't notice me, hidden behind a towering glass column. Instinctively, I raised my camera, adjusting the focus. Not to photograph, but just to observe. Delaney was typing furiously, her brows furrowed, lips pressed into a thin line. Then she paused, read something, and a slow smile spread across her face. I couldn't make out the full message, but as she turned slightly, the screen came into view, just enough for my lens to catch a single, devastating line before it vanished. Tonight, one last time, my bed, not Jasper's. It was jarring. Intimate. Reckless. Delaney glanced around, slipped her phone into her clutch, and headed for the private elevator without a word. I hesitated, but only for a moment, before following slowly, careful to stay out of sight. I had no intention of confronting her. I just wanted to know, to understand. The elevator doors closed behind Delaney, and I took the stairs, 2 floors down, exiting discreetly into the underground parking structure. I knew Delaney's car, the sleek silver coupe our father bought her for graduation. It sat alone at the far end, near the hotel's rear entrance. I waited in the shadows, my camera slung at my side, my breath shallow in the cold concrete air. Minutes crawled by. Then, a black SUV pulled in and parked right beside the coupe. The driver stepped out. A tall man in a fitted coat, clean-cut, confident. He looked familiar. Cole Maddox. One of Jasper's business contacts, if I remembered correctly. I'd seen him once at a charity function. Charming and far too smooth for his own good. Delaney got out of her car and walked straight into his arms. No hesitation. No pretense. The kiss was slow. Deep. Familiar. This wasn't the thrill of a new affair. This was something older, something worn in. I lifted my camera. I hadn't meant to, but my hands acted before my mind caught up. I switched to video mode and pressed record. I didn't zoom in. I didn't need to. It was enough to simply see what was happening. Enough to remember. Enough to know. They talked briefly. Delaney laughed softly, almost provocatively, brushing his coat lapel, and then, They simply disappeared into the back seat of the coupe. The door closed behind them with a soft click. I stopped recording. I stood absolutely still for another minute, not moving, then I walked away without looking back. I never showed anyone that footage. I told no one. For days afterwards, I tried to convince myself it wasn't my place. Maybe Delaney had her reasons. Maybe it wasn't my job to ruin a wedding, no matter how profoundly cold our relationship had become. I kept the clip on a backup drive, unnamed, buried beneath a dozen folders of client work. Until today. Until I arrived at my sister's wedding, wearing a quiet, carefully chosen dress, only to be seated near an emergency exit like a complete stranger. Until my own mother walked by and dismissed me with a cruel smile, as if she hadn't even raised me. Until my sister, wrapped in white lace and dripping with self-importance, stood over me with the sheer audacity to insult me to my face. Until that dry piece of bread. That was when I knew. I didn't see it as vengeance. Not exactly. It wasn't raw rage that moved me. It was a searing clarity. Years of being diminished, erased, laughed at. I didn't want to fight. I wanted a reckoning. And so, as the orchestra finished their final prelude and the faint, distant clinking of silverware echoed from beyond the ballroom doors, I closed my hand around the USB in my lap. The one that contained not only the video from the garage, but another recording from that engagement party. My camera had picked up so much more than I realized that night. Words. Smirks. Voices. It was all there. And tonight, every single one of them would see it. They would hear it. The day after the wedding rehearsal, Boston hummed with the faint promise of early spring. It was barely warm, but the bitter frozen grip had finally loosened. I drove in silence toward the house I once called home, a pale blue colonial with stone steps and an iron gate, tucked into a quiet neighborhood just outside the city. The trees in the yard were beginning to bud, and the magnolia bush Evelyn always boasted about was just starting to bloom. Some things, it seemed, never changed. My intention was simple, to speak privately with my father, Reginald. He had always been the quieter one, the one who, at least, never outright insulted my dreams, even if he never truly supported them. There was a chance, however minuscule, that he might actually listen. That maybe he didn't know everything. That maybe, just maybe, he could still be reached. I parked at the end of the drive, grabbed my bag, phone, and camera, still with me from the wedding prep, and walked to the side entrance. I knew the door code. Evelyn never bothered to change it. Inside, the house smelled of polished wood and cloying lavender oil. I paused by the entryway, hearing voices drifting from the sunroom. I was about to call out, "Hello," when I caught my mother's name. Then my own. My steps slowed. "Don't worry," Evelyn's voice rang out, calm and clipped. "I've already moved the house, the condo in Martha's Vineyard, and the legacy shares into your name. Reginald has no idea." "You're sure?" Delaney's voice followed, sharper, more insistent. "Because after the wedding, I want things in motion fast. We can't afford for him to start poking around." "He won't," Evelyn said with chilling conviction. "That man hasn't reviewed a financial document in 5 years. He still thinks our lawyer handles everything." There was the delicate sound of a teacup clinking against porcelain. Then, quieter, but sickeningly clear, "This is for us. For the women of this family. You've done more for our future with this marriage than Iris could have done in a lifetime with her little gallery shows." I felt my fingers tighten, clenching around the leather strap of my bag. Delaney gave a low, chilling laugh. "After I'm married, I'll be the one holding the pen," she boasted. "The accounts, the estate, the trust, everything. I'll make sure you're set, Mom. You can finally retire. No more pretending with Dad. No more coddling Iris. Let her stay in Brooklyn with her little artistic life." Evelyn chuckled then, a sound devoid of warmth, full of ice. "Oh, she won't last long. She's always been a phase, not a future." There was a long pause, broken only by the rhythmic tapping of Delaney's fingers against glass. "Do you think she suspects anything?" Delaney finally asked. "Suspect?" Evelyn scoffed. "I doubt she's capable. She still thinks honesty means something. Poor thing probably thinks love and hard work are enough. This time, both women laughed. Sharp. Certain. Vicious. I didn't move. My breath had gone shallow, and a dull, throbbing ache built behind my temples. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket, tapped the recording app, and quietly, almost silently, hit record. My hand trembled slightly, not from rage, but from the brutal finality of it all. This wasn't just casual family cruelty. This was betrayal, masked as legacy. Theft in a silk dress. I could hear Delaney pacing now. I don't even love Jasper, she said, almost to herself. But this is what power looks like. A Winston marriage, Mom. I'll be able to walk into any boardroom in Boston and own the room. You taught me that. Align yourself with advantage. Leave feelings at the door. Exactly, Evelyn said, her voice brimming with pride. You learned well. And Iris, Delaney added, with a dry, dismissive edge. She's just background. Like wallpaper. We keep her around so no one accuses us of being heartless. But after the wedding, I say we cut the polite act. I agree, Evelyn said smoothly. No more invitations. No more forced holidays. She'll fade. And we will flourish. I blinked back the stinging sensation in my eyes. Not from their words, but from the brutal, gut-wrenching honesty of it all. It wasn't jealousy I felt. It was an ice-cold clarity. My mother and sister weren't merely thoughtless or casually cruel. No, they were architects of deceit. This wasn't just about Delaney's affair. This was about rewriting an entire inheritance, silencing inconvenient voices, and systematically erasing anyone who didn't serve their narrative. I watched the recording meter tick upward, 1 minute, 2, 3, until their conversation began to drift towards brunch menus and honeymoon details. Then I slowly backed away, retracing my steps toward the side door. I didn't slam it. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel the full, crushing weight of the betrayal yet. That would come later. For now, I had a recording. And soon, they'd have an audience. The ballroom shimmered with light as the orchestra finished its gentle interlude. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above tables dressed in pristine white silk and gold-trimmed menus. Waitstaff moved in quiet. Choreographed precision, refilling champagne glasses, clearing empty dessert plates. The air held that peculiar stillness just before the formalities resumed. At the head table, Jasper stood, raising his glass with a broad, practiced smile. His father, Douglas Langston, stood proudly beside him, a man with a politician's voice and a banker's ruthless restraint. Douglas addressed the crowd with effortless ease. To family, he boomed, pausing just long enough to let the clink of glasses echo in the hushed silence. To the joining of two legacies. To the future of Jasper and Delaney, may their union be as enduring as their names. Applause followed, warm and perfectly practiced. Then the MC returned to the microphone, flipping through a small stack of note cards. Before we conclude the evening, we have one final toast. A special message from the bride's sister. Iris. There was a brief, confused shuffle of surprise in the room. Delaney's smile faltered for the first time all evening. Evelyn, seated 2 seats away, stiffened perceptibly. I stood up. Calmly. My emerald green dress, simple yet dignified, caught a soft glint beneath the ballroom lights. I held no glass. No notes. Walking toward the front with slow, deliberate steps, I turned to face the stunned guests. I appreciate the opportunity, I began, my voice clear and even, cutting through the stunned silence. But I won't be offering a toast tonight. A murmur rippled through the room. Chairs creaked. Someone coughed nervously. I'm not here to offer blessings or rehearse sentiment, I continued, my voice unwavering. I came with something else. Something far more honest. Something long, long overdue. Delaney straightened in her seat, her face a mask of dawning horror. What is she doing? She whispered, her voice harsh and frantic, to Evelyn. I held up the small black USB drive between my fingers, then calmly handed it to the technician near the stage. I'd like to share a video, I said simply. Please play it. The lights dimmed. The giant screen descended behind the head table, plunging the room into a tense, expectant hush. The atmosphere shifted instantly, from polite curiosity to restrained, palpable tension. I turned and stood to the side, my hands folded calmly in front of me. The first scene flickered to life, Delaney, standing in the shadows of a parking structure, her coat draped over her arm, her phone glowing in the dark. Then, the message she read, blown up huge on the screen, illuminating the silence. Tonight, one last time, my bed, not Jasper's. Gasps scattered through the room. Then came the next footage, grainy, yes, but undeniably clear. Delaney and a man, stepping into the back seat of her car, arms wrapped tightly, lips locked in a deep, undeniable kiss. Some guests turned away in disgust, others stared, frozen in disbelief. Jasper sat unmoving, his knuckles white against the tablecloth. The scene shifted again. This time, audio played. Evelyn's voice echoed through the speakers, precise and chilling. "I've already moved the house, the vineyard property, and the shares into your name. Reginald has no idea." Delaney's bitter chuckle followed. "After the wedding, everything's mine. You can retire, Mom. I'll take it from here." From the shadows of the crowd, my father, Reginald Harrison, rose slowly, his eyes locked on the screen, completely shattered. The ballroom had gone utterly, terrifyingly silent. "Turn it off now," Delaney shrieked, suddenly on her feet, her voice cracking in pure panic. "That's private. This is doctored. This is slander." But the video played on. Evelyn's cold laughter joined Delaney's. The sickening sound of greed, disguised as maternal pride. A blueprint for betrayal, drawn out for all to see. Then, just before the screen faded, a new voice echoed into the darkened ballroom. "That's enough." But it wasn't from the speakers. All heads turned as Cole Maddox, dressed in a dark suit, stepped forward from the side entrance. Real. Present. Not a recording. He moved toward the front of the room with calm, terrifying precision. Delaney's eyes widened in utter disbelief. Her complexion drained of all color, leaving her face ghostly pale. "What are you doing here?" she choked out. Cole ignored her completely. He turned to the guests, to Jasper, to the entire Langston family, to every single person watching this train wreck unfold. "I was invited to the engagement party," he stated, his voice calm, chilling. "I didn't know I was just a part of a game." She said it was one last night, nothing more. His voice remained steady, but it became clear, to everyone, that he was just another tool. A man used to hurt another. "I had a feeling she'd twist the story," he continued, looking directly at Delaney, "so I recorded our conversations. I have everything. Every message, every plan." Delaney began to shake her head furiously, a desperate, pathetic gesture. "He's lying. He's obsessed with me." Cole looked at her then, truly looked at her for the first time that evening. "Delaney," he said, his voice laced with a strange mixture of regret and contempt, "I loved you once. Briefly. But what you did to your sister, your father, your fiancé." He turned to Jasper, his gaze unwavering. "You deserve the truth, Jasper. Not this performance." The screen went black. The ballroom lights returned, harsh and unforgiving. The room remained utterly silent, and in that silence, the truth finally stood taller than all the glittering decorations. Taller than their immense wealth. Taller than the meticulously crafted reputation they'd all fought so desperately to maintain. Jasper Langston didn't move for a long, agonizing moment. His fingers twitched slightly at his sides as the last echo of Cole Maddox's voice faded from the speakers. The wedding ballroom stood utterly still, as if the ornate chandeliers themselves were holding their breath. Delaney had stopped crying, though her face was streaked with blackened mascara, and her body was hunched, shrinking, as if trying to hide from a world that had suddenly, violently, turned its back on her. Evelyn sat beside her, lips pressed into a bloodless line, her eyes darting frantically across the room like a cornered animal. And then Jasper stood. He didn't look at Delaney. He didn't look at the shocked crowd. Instead, he reached slowly for his left hand and removed the platinum band he had placed on his finger not 2 hours ago. Holding it between his thumb and forefinger, he stared at it for a long, chilling moment. I love to lie in a white dress, he said quietly. His voice wasn't raised, but it rang out across the ballroom like a final, devastating bell. He placed the ring down gently on the linen-covered table and turned to his parents. Douglas Langston and his wife, Elizabeth, had remained impeccably composed throughout the entire scandalous unfolding. But now, the steel in Douglas's jaw had hardened into something fearsome. He stood beside his son, tall and grim, and turned his eyes, cold and unwavering, toward Evelyn Whitmore. This marriage, he stated, his voice resonating with authority, was not just a personal union. It was a business alignment, one we considered sacred. But deceit is not a value we do business with. Evelyn opened her mouth to protest, a pathetic little sound, but Douglas cut her off with a sharp, lethal glance. As of this moment, the Langston Group withdraws from all pending and proposed partnerships with Whitmore Holdings. Effective immediately, any outstanding negotiations are null. Those words. They hit harder than anything I had said or shown. Gasps broke from the lips of several guests who worked in finance or society circles. They knew exactly what this meant. The Whitmore name wasn't just taking a social hit, it was about to financially implode. And fast. Delaney collapsed into her chair, her hands frantically covering her face, her world crumbling around her. Jasper, without a single word, turned and walked away from the table, his mother following quietly, her hand on his shoulder, a silent act of support. And then, Evelyn broke. "This is your fault," she shrieked, rising so quickly that her chair tipped behind her with a loud crash. "You!" She pointed a trembling, manicured finger at me. "You orchestrated this circus. You ruined my daughter's wedding. You destroyed everything we built." But the crowd was no longer listening to her. Guests had already begun to rise from their seats, quietly collecting their purses, their coats, their shattered dignity. Conversations murmured like wind rustling through trees, soft, swirling, but unmistakably moving in one direction, away. "She deserves better," one woman whispered as she passed me. "I had no idea Delaney was like that," a man muttered to his wife. No wonder Iris never came to the holidays. No one, not a single soul, even looked at Evelyn. "Sit down," she barked at no one in particular. "This isn't over." Her voice cracked again, hoarse and shrill. "Do you know who we are? We are the Whitmores." No one answered. The orchestra had long stopped playing. The only sounds now were the rustle of dresses, the scrape of chairs, the slow, echoing footsteps of guests who had seen enough. I stood still, my hands calmly at my sides, my eyes focused on nothing in particular. The silence that now permeated the room felt heavier, not out of shame, but out of an overwhelming sense of finality. I didn't feel victorious. I felt unburdened. From the far end of the room, near the now-darkened video screen, Reginald Harrison remained seated. He hadn't spoken a single word since the video played. His tie was loosened, his eyes unfocused, utterly lost. But as the guests emptied the ballroom, as the Whitmore name collapsed beneath the crushing weight of its secrets, he finally turned to look at me. Our eyes met. He didn't speak. Didn't offer comfort, apology, or even anger. Just a long, unreadable stare from a father who had just realized he'd built his entire family legacy on shifting sand. And I, though I said nothing either, knew one thing with crystalline clarity now. The fall had truly begun. The ballroom had emptied out completely, leaving only the ghost of white roses and spiced candle wax lingering in the air. Servers moved quietly through the ruins of what had once been a picture-perfect wedding, clearing half-finished glasses of champagne and untouched slices of cake. In the distance, Evelyn's voice had long since faded into silence, either from sheer exhaustion or stunned disbelief. Delaney was nowhere to be seen. I remained near the stage, my green dress now slightly wrinkled, my face still composed, though my soul trembled with everything that had just unraveled. I hadn't even noticed the woman in the dark burgundy coat until a voice called my name, soft but firm, Iris Harrison. I turned, startled, to see a figure I hadn't seen in almost 2 years. Sylvia Renner. She stood tall, perfectly composed, her silver-gray bob neatly in place, black gloves still held in one hand, as if she'd just arrived from an exclusive art auction. She didn't wear the awkward smile of a social guest, but the direct, appraising gaze of someone who had witnessed something profound, something they didn't expect. "Sylvia," I managed, barely masking my surprise. "I didn't know you were here." "I wasn't invited," Sylvia replied with a wry, knowing smile. "But someone close to me was." Word travels fast in art circles, especially when chaos is dressed in silk and scandal. I wasn't sure what to say. The last time we'd spoken, Sylvia had delivered a rejection with her signature, brutal grace. "Your technical skills are sharp," she'd said then. "But I don't feel the soul in your work. I need rawness. Something that dares to hurt." It had stung deeply, even though I'd nodded respectfully and thanked her. Now, Sylvia looked around the disheveled ballroom. "I saw the video," she said, without preamble. I stood in the back. Watched the whole thing. I lowered my eyes. That wasn't supposed to be art. Sylvia's voice was quiet, but it carried the kind of certainty that made people stop walking, stop breathing. It was. Whether you meant it or not, it was art. Raw. Painful. The kind of truth you can't curate. You didn't just expose their lies, Iris. You exposed yourself. Your pain. Your strength. That takes more than talent. It takes conviction. I blinked, momentarily speechless. 2 years ago, I finally managed, my voice a little rough. "You told me my work was too polished. Too distant." "I did," Sylvia said simply. And I was right. A beat of silence hung between us, heavy with unspoken history. "And now?" I asked, not confrontational, just open. Sylvia stepped closer. "Now, I'm looking at a woman who no longer hides behind composition and technique. I saw truth on that screen, Iris, and I want to show it to the world. If you're willing." I tilted my head, unsure if I was imagining this impossible offer. "I want to curate a solo exhibition," Sylvia continued, her voice warm, but firm. "You're first. A full collection. We'll call it Behind the Curtain, Portraits of Truth. Not just the wedding. Everything. The gaping absence in your childhood. The soul-crushing invisibility within your family. The raw reclamation of your own voice." I felt my breath catch in my throat. Of all the things I had braced myself for after that night, the backlash, the blame, the crushing shame, this was not among them. A magnificent door had just opened in the middle of the ashes. "You're serious?" I whispered, almost afraid to believe it. Sylvia met my eyes, her gaze unwavering. "I don't waste time chasing flukes, Iris. What you showed today wasn't a mere moment. It was a culmination. And it deserves a stage." For a moment, I didn't answer. My eyes drifted to the far end of the room where my father still sat alone, head bowed, a broken man. This room no longer held me. Not as a place of rejection. Not as a memory of pain. Now, it was simply a space I had passed through, on my way to something undeniably more. I turned back to Sylvia, a new resolve hardening in my gaze. "When do we begin?" I asked. Sylvia smiled. "We already have." The early morning light of Brooklyn carried a different kind of clarity than Boston's cold grandeur. Here, the sun filtered through the windows of my modest new studio, warming the exposed brick walls and casting gentle patterns across the polished wood floor. I'd signed the lease only a week after returning from the wedding, propelled by an urgency to start again, not just geographically, but in spirit. The space was small, but it was fiercely mine. A corner was set up with backdrops and lighting, my cameras arranged with methodical care. A second-hand coffee machine hissed in the corner, filling the room with that earthy scent I'd always associated with quiet, intense focus. On the wall opposite the entrance, I hung 3 photographs, portraits taken in those stolen moments when no one thought I was watching. One showed a child with mud-streaked cheeks, laughing freely in a Bronx park. Another, an elderly woman on a bench, hands folded in silent prayer. And the last, still unfinished, was a close-up of my own reflection, half-shadowed, half-lit by the sunlight cutting through my window. It wasn't perfect, but it was undeniably real. At first, the phone barely rang. Walk-ins were rare. Those who did inquire often paused awkwardly, their eyes flickering with recognition, trying to place me. Some whispered. One client, after an initial booking, canceled with a vague message. Some things came up. I didn't need to ask. I knew the story had spread far wider than I'd imagined. Not the art, at least not yet. But the scandal. The viral headline, Woman Exposes Cheating Sister at Wedding in Front of 200 Guests. News blogs had latched onto it, social media platforms flooded with opinions. Some applauded my bravery, others called me vindictive. There was even a podcast episode titled Family Secrets and Public Screens, The Iris Harrison Incident. It was surreal and definitely not always flattering, but I had made peace with that. Sylvia checked in weekly, encouraging me to focus solely on the upcoming exhibition. Let the noise settle, she'd advised. It always does. And then, your work will speak for itself. And it did. The first real break came when an editor from Art Perspective Quarterly reached out for an interview. Not about the wedding, but specifically about my series of photos titled Unseen. I hesitated, wondering if it was just another angle to sensationalize my story. But the editor surprised me. What interests me, he said, his voice sincere, is the empathy in your lens. It's not just what you show, it's what you reveal by not looking away. Shortly after the article published, a quiet shift began. A retired jazz musician called to ask for a portrait. Then, a mother of 3 from Queens booked a session for her family's first photograph in 10 years. A small but respected art blog listed me as one to watch in 2020, noting my documentary gaze and honesty without the coldness of objectivity. My calendar began to fill, not rapidly, but steadily. And more importantly, the people who came wanted to be seen by me, not just photographed. They came because they had heard that Iris didn't edit away the wrinkles or stage perfection. She captured moments, truths, the kind that stayed long after the shutter clicked. One evening, as I reviewed raw files from a shoot, my phone buzzed with a message from Sylvia. Final gallery specs approved. Opening date set. Ready to show them? I smiled. I glanced again at the photo of myself on the wall, half-shadowed, half-lit. Then I turned back to my work, my fingers steady on the keyboard. I wasn't hiding anymore. This new chapter hadn't arrived with a parade or a heartfelt apology. It had crept in, quiet and certain, like light through an open window. And it felt, finally, like home. In the brutal days following the wedding, the Whitmore name didn't just fall. It became a cautionary tale, whispered with disdain in the upper echelons of Boston society. What had once been murmured admiration swiftly morphed into loud, public disapproval. And my mother, Evelyn Whitmore, once the undisputed queen of chamber music luncheons and art fundraiser galas, found herself utterly without a single invitation. It began with a cold, deafening silence. Calls she had grown accustomed to, weekly updates from event organizers, casual brunch confirmations, simply ceased. Then came the pointed, public removals. Her name was discreetly erased from the board of the Women's Heritage Society. A polite but chillingly firm letter arrived, stating that in light of recent family matters, the board had voted unanimously for her resignation. The Boston Evening Register printed a subdued, yet damning, piece about the implosion of a once-admired socialite dynasty. Her longtime friend and social confidant, Helena Montgomery, refused to return any of her messages. Even her hairdresser canceled their standing Thursday appointments. Evelyn had always taught her daughters that appearances were everything. But now no tailored dress, no polished accent, no amount of forced charm could shield her. The video was everywhere. Not just the affair, but the gleeful, chilling cruelty caught in Evelyn's voice, speaking about me as if I were a mere stain on fine linen. It wasn't just scandal. It was undeniable evidence of character. And society, in its swift, brutal way, was quick to turn its back. Meanwhile, Reginald Whitmore faced a blow that bruised more than just his ego. It cracked the very foundations of his financial empire. 3 major real estate development contracts were suddenly withdrawn. One, from a longtime investor based in Connecticut, cited uncertainty in leadership values. Another, a resort firm on Cape Cod, pulled out during final negotiations, bluntly stating a need to protect its brand. He tried to control the fallout, to put out the fires, but the whispers followed him into every meeting. Isn't he the father? Wasn't that his daughter? What made it all worse was the agonizing silence from his own household. Evelyn barely spoke, lost in her own storm of embarrassment and stunned disbelief. And Delaney? Delaney had disappeared from the house entirely. When she finally called him, her voice was hollow, broken. "I need help," she said. He barely recognized his own daughter's voice. Delaney had always been the golden one, the shimmering pride of the family, the beautiful face of their relentless ambition. But her fall was sharper, more brutal, than either of her parents could have ever anticipated. Jasper had not only ended the engagement publicly, he refused to answer any further calls. His mother, Sylvia Langston, issued a swift and scathing press statement, making it crystal clear that the Langston family had no ongoing or future affiliations with the Whitmores. The jewelry firm that sponsored Delaney's last campaign dropped her overnight. Modeling agencies ghosted her. Her agent refused to return calls. She still had her opulent condo, still had her designer wardrobe, still had her ridiculous collection of high heels, until she checked her private savings account. The one she'd created with Cole. The one that was supposed to hold enough to start over, just in case things with Jasper went south. The balance was zero. She blinked in disbelief, tried to log in again. Still zero. When she called Cole's number, it went straight to voicemail. The last message she'd received from him, just a few weeks earlier, had said, "Relax, beautiful. After the wedding, we'll be set." Now, his social media had vanished. His apartment was empty. No mutual friends had heard from him. In a quiet, sterile moment inside her empty condo, Delaney sat on the cold floor, shoes still on, staring at the dead phone in her hand. Her mascara had long since smudged, her breath shallow, her thoughts darting towards something she had never dared imagine. She had been played. She had played everyone, her fiancé, her family, even me. But in the end, the one person she thought she could control had turned out to be playing her all along. She didn't cry. Not at first. But as the hours wore on as her messages to Cole remained stubbornly unread, the shock twisted into something far darker, far more terrifying. Her meticulously constructed empire, built on manipulation and shallow beauty, had crumbled in a single weekend. And there was no one left to help her pick up the pieces. Back in Boston, Evelyn stood at her kitchen window, stirring a cup of tea she knew she wouldn't drink. Her reflection in the glass looked older. Smaller, somehow. She had once reigned over charity auctions and exclusive tea parties. But now, the silence in that opulent room was heavier than any social defeat she'd ever faced. She had no gallery openings to attend, no press luncheons to host, no golden daughter to boast about. All she had was a story, my story, playing over and over in the minds of every person who had once admired her. A story she couldn't rewrite. A truth she couldn't silence. The Whitmore name hadn't just fallen, it had imploded. I didn't destroy a wedding. I revealed a truth. A devastating truth that had been hidden behind designer gowns, perfectly posed family photos, and hollow speeches for decades. What you just witnessed wasn't revenge, not really. It was liberation. And not just mine. Because maybe, just maybe, someone watching this has eaten the same dry bread. Maybe you've been pushed to the side, told to smile and stay quiet, just like I was. Maybe you've wondered if speaking up is even worth the fight. Let me tell you, it is. That thunderous silence that followed my video wasn't just shock. It was the sound of truth, finally echoing in a room that never, ever expected it. And that, my friends, is why this story truly matters. If you stayed until the very end, thank you. Now, I want to ask you, what would you have done if you were in Iris's shoes? Let me know your experiences in the comments below. Because next week, we're diving into another family, another deep, dark secret, and another woman who refused to stay silent. This isn't just storytelling anymore. This is vindication. And trust me, you're going to want to see what's coming next. The rain came in sheets that afternoon, washing the Brooklyn streets in a cold, steady rhythm. Inside my studio, I stood at the sink, rinsing developer trays while soft jazz played from the radio. The studio smelled of chemicals, coffee, and a deep, comforting quiet. It was a rhythm I'd grown to appreciate, days that moved without drama, without anyone demanding more than I was willing to give. I had just returned from hanging 3 framed prints in the gallery window when the knock came. A soft tap, then again, and then a pause, like the person on the other side was reconsidering. I dried my hands and walked to the door, unsure if it was a courier or perhaps a student from the community class I'd started teaching on Saturdays. But when I opened it, the entire atmosphere shifted. Delaney stood there, drenched. Her hair clung to her face, and the designer coat she wore looked soaked through, hanging off her frame like a heavy weight she could no longer carry. She didn't speak at first. She just stood there, hands limp at her sides, raindrops trailing down her cheeks, some indistinguishable from tears. I didn't move. I held the door, but didn't widen it. "I came," Delaney finally said, her voice raw. Whether from crying or the cold, I couldn't tell. I didn't know where else to go. Brooklyn traffic passed behind her, indifferent to the drama unfolding. Inside, the studio's warmth waited, but I made no gesture. "Why no?" I asked, my voice steady, unyielding. Delaney's lip trembled. She looked down at the wet sidewalk, as if searching for words in the cracks of the concrete. Then, she met my eyes. "Because I have nothing left to lie for." The sentence hung in the air, fragile and final. I studied my sister's face. The makeup was minimal smeared. Her eyes weren't pleading, not the way they used to be when she wanted something. They were tired. Stripped bare. "I'm not asking for anything," Delaney added quickly. I need to work. I need something real. I can clean. I can run errands. You don't even have to look at me." I stepped back from the door, just enough to let the possibility of entry exist. "You clean," I said, my voice firm. "You don't talk. You start from zero." Delaney nodded, as if she had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. "I understand." I turned and walked back inside, leaving the door ajar. Delaney followed, shedding her coat near the door, her shoes leaving wet spots on the polished floor. She looked around the studio, her eyes passing over the prints, the lights, the order I had painstakingly created. She didn't touch anything. I handed her a mop. "Start there." Delaney took it without question and began in the far corner. She didn't ask about pay. She didn't ask for a towel. She moved quietly, head down, water pooling near her feet as she worked. I returned to my desk, picked up my editing tablet, and resumed reviewing images. Outside, the rain softened into a drizzle, but the air in the studio remained still, thick with something unsaid. Forgiveness had not arrived. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. But consequences had. And with them, the first faint shadow of change. The gallery buzzed with soft conversation, the delicate clink of champagne glasses, and the slow, reverent footsteps of patrons moving from photograph to photograph. Portraits of Truth had drawn a larger crowd than anyone, even Sylvia, had anticipated. Art critics mingled with serious collectors, curious locals conversed with seasoned curators. I stood near the far wall, just out of the central spotlight, observing it all rather than basking in it. Each piece had been carefully chosen, faces lined with the maps of time, hands folded in quiet grief, smiles cracked in mid-recovery. No false lighting. No perfect, staged angles. Just people exactly as they were. My favorite piece hung near the exit, titled Uninvited Light, a haunting portrait of an elderly man sitting alone by a window. It had already been tagged, sold. Sylvia Renner approached me, offering a quiet, knowing nod. "You've started something, Iris. Something honest. Raw. Needed." I nodded back, not out of pride, but out of a deep, resonant recognition. I had spent most of my life desperately trying to be seen. Now, people didn't just see me. They saw through my lens. Near the center of the gallery, a familiar voice interrupted my thoughts. "Iris." I turned. Jasper Langston stood a few feet away, holding a wine glass he hadn't touched. His suit was simpler than the one he had worn on what should have been his wedding day, but his posture remained upright, gracious. "I didn't expect you," I said, surprised. "I know," he offered a small, sad smile. "But I needed to say something. You saved me, Iris." Without even knowing it. I didn't reply, but the look in my eyes softened, A faint acknowledgement. I don't think I ever truly loved Delaney, he continued, his voice quiet, reflective. I think I loved the idea of her. Of who I was supposed to be with. He paused, his gaze drifting to a photograph nearby. Watching your video, seeing the truth, it felt like being dragged out of a dream. And I woke up a freer man. I gave a faint nod. There was no need for more words. He didn't linger. Your work is powerful, Iris. I hope you never stop. And with that, he moved on, vanishing into the appreciative crowd. Later, as the evening waned and the final guests filtered out, I stepped near the glass entrance, needing a breath of fresh, cool air. The city glowed beyond the wet streets, reflecting gallery lights, passing taxis, muffled laughter from the bar across the avenue. That's when I saw her. Evelyn. She stood beneath the awning across the street. No umbrella. No entourage. Her posture was still proud, her chin lifted slightly, but her expression was utterly unreadable. She didn't wave. She didn't approach. She just watched. We stood like that for a long minute. Two women, connected by blood, divided by absolutely everything else. The mother who never praised, and the daughter who no longer waited for it. I didn't call out. I simply reached into my coat pocket, pulled out the camera I always carried. With practiced hands, I adjusted the focus, capturing Evelyn's image from behind the rain-streaked glass, framed by silence and the immense distance we had both chosen. Later, when I uploaded the image, I gave it no title at first, just a timestamp. But before printing, I added a small caption at the bottom corner. Sometimes, silence says enough. And so, the girl who once sat alone at family dinners, who was handed a dry piece of bread at her sister's wedding, didn't just survive the shame. She turned it into art. Into truth. Into liberation. I didn't need to scream or fight or beg for love. I simply showed the world what was real. And that was more than enough. If you made it to this point, then maybe, like me, you believe that silence can be powerful, that truth doesn't need permission, and that sometimes the deepest betrayals can become the clearest mirrors. Now, I really want to hear from you. Have you ever been the black sheep in your own family? Let me know your experiences in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Take care. And good luck.